Okay, Abe Haley. Do you prefer Abram?
Yeah.
You do prefer Abram. I'm gonna pull out my phone because I wrote Abe a long time ago.
Yeah, it's more of a recent search. Totally Enneagram 4 move.
You're not an Enneagram 4.
Wing 3.
You're not a 3 wing 4?
I'm a very strong 3.
What?
100% of 4. The way you can determine core desire and where you go in stress.
And where do you go in stress? Where does 4 go in stress? Also, why are you into witchcraft?
You know, student ministry basically is witchcraft. I'm more of a Myers-Briggs guy because now I'm actually certified in Myers-Briggs consulting and coaching, by the way. If you ever need it or you know anyone who needs it.
I need it.
100%.
Let's turn this into counseling right now, please.
100%. Yeah. I can 100%, if I did a Myers-Briggs with a team, I can increase their efficiency by 80%.
Wow.
1,000%.
Wow.
If you just do the things I say.
I'm going to cash in on that. How much is your consulting fee, and why is it $10,000 in an hour?
For you, it is very cheap. For other people, it is very expensive.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about my listeners, Reconstructing Youth Ministry listeners?
I'll give them
if they work for a church.
If they work for a church,
how do they contact you? I'm dead serious right now. If someone was like, you know what, my team could
go to Abram Haley. I think it's AbramHaley.com.
It's not Abe Haley.
That's not Abe Haley. It's not.
Okay, where does a 4 go in stress?
Hold on one sec. I was actually pulling that up.
I've got my Road Back to You book in here somewhere.
Great book. And so is the other one.
Dude.
There's 2 you should read.
Which one?
I'd have to go back and look.
I've got it in,
I'm only as fresh as what I just read.
I'm like in the middle of moving offices. And so I discovered the Enneagram at one of my lowest points in my life.
A 4, when stressed, Enneagram 4 goes to an unhealthy type 2, which is, hey, how can I help? Like that kind of thing. And in growth, you go to a 1.
Because it is like an opposite. It is like an opposite because I don't see you as a 2 at all.
Yeah, definitely 4 wing.
At all.
Definitely 4 wing 3. Totally the artist, totally the...
You're a 4 wing 3.
Which is interesting because as a Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENTJ, which is
I don't know...
Very rare pairing.
Almost at all, the Myers-Briggs.
Typically, when you're an ENTJ, you're like an Enneagram 8 or an Enneagram 3. But in very rare occasions, if you lean more towards feeling, which I do, even though I'm a thinker, extroversion, intuition, thinking, judging.
Can you come back next season and we just do Myers-Briggs and Enneagram?
100%,
because I want to talk about student leadership.
Here's the great thing. We can do Myers-Briggs, and then I've got someone you can do on Enneagram who is the GOAT, and she has a podcast and a book. Her name's Ainsley Britton.
Ainsley Britton. Where's she at?
She's currently in Baton Rouge. She used to work for me now, and she has been a breakout speaker for me, but she comes to Houston from
Lives in Louisiana, comes to Houston from time to time.
Dude, she is the GOAT.
Okay. What's her podcast? Do you know? I'm sorry. I'm asking you.
No.
It's funny. I told you I would give you all the prep, and I've given you nothing but off the top of the dome questions today.
Give me a sec. I'm gonna pull it up.
Yeah.
But dude,
because my Enneagram listeners are gonna want.
She's great.
Gonna want that. I enjoyed
Wild Confidence.
Wild Confidence.
Yeah, she's got a good following on social media too, man. Like, I think she's got 10,000. She's my go-to Enneagram person.
Wait, I just started typing in her name. Wild Confidence.
Her husband is also the most beautiful human you'll ever see in your life.
Physically?
Both.
All of it.
He's tall. He's wealthy. He's good-looking. He loves Jesus. He's
okay. Wild Confidence.
Ainsley B, bro.
Ainsley B.
Yeah, 13,000 followers.
Okay, I'm on it. Beth McCord. Beth McCord wrote all those Enneagram books specifically like for each type.
And she just wrote Enneagram for Teens by Zondervan, and it was published by
Really? You've given me 17 resources already, and we haven't even gotten to the introduction of the topic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Abram Haley, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because we've got about 45 minutes to talk, and I want people to understand why I'm talking to you. So a little bit about where you came from, how you got into student ministry, all that.
So my name is Abram Haley.
Yeah.
I'm 37 years old. Started working in student ministry when I was 18 years old as an intern at the church that I got plugged into, which is in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Parkview Baptist Church. I got into student ministry primarily because of a dark place I was in as a 7th grader. Got saved at a young age, grew up in a family that took me to church, parents trying their best to be followers of Jesus. Big family, though. So I was number 4 out of 5 kids. And 7th grade was really rough.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. 6th grade was really rough. Going into 7th grade, difficult. And we got this new student pastor at our church, a guy named Robert Terrell, good friend of mine today, church planner up in Wisconsin, incredible dude. And what happened was he approached me on a Sunday and realized I wasn't plugged into the student ministry and said, hey, man, why don't you come to a Wednesday night? I said, no, thank you. He said, hey, I'll meet you out front and I'll make sure you know somebody that night. So I show up that night very hesitant. My mom drops me off and there he is out front looking, just hanging out. And I meet him. He brings me in, introduces me to all these students, which later I found out were just like influential students in the student ministry. And then got plugged into the student ministry in 7th grade, 8th grade, summer of 2001, went to camp. God transformed my life at that camp. Wild thing there, the speaker was a guy named Dr. Jackson, who was a professor at seminary, who later was one of my professors. And that summer is when I think God started to kind of put a desire in my heart to do ministry.
Wow.
By the time I was a senior, calling to ministry, surrendered to that. Got licensed at the age of 18, became an intern at the church, not ordained yet.
Yeah. They're
And
different.
then I wanted to be a lead pastor, but God only opened doors to student ministry.
Yeah.
And so the first church I worked at, it was student ministry. And then I became a student pastor at a small little church in Louisiana and when I was 19, and I've been doing it ever since.
That's like a full-time role, youth
It was
ministry?
a part-time.
Part-time.
It was part-time that. I was doing another part-time job and I was in school full-time.
But you were in charge.
I was in charge.
Wow.
They said they had 50 kids. They had 8 kids. And then in 1 year, we went from 8 to 40. And that was wild. Because
Yeah.
the church was 100 people.
They said they had 50. Sorry, you said that real fast.
They said they had 50.
They had 8.
They had 8.
This is the most Baptist church thing.
Yeah, I know. I didn't know any better. I was 19, man.
Oh man. Yeah. That's why. Okay. So that even feels to me like it's going to bleed into our student leadership conversation, like to give a 19-year-old the reins of a student ministry. I love it. So, you have been, so what does that put you like 19 years in as 37?
So I
18 years in?
I like to say I started at age 18 because I was a intern in student ministry.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, man, I'm 19, 20 years in.
Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I just, again, off the top of the dome question, how does it feel to be a guy your age? I'm older than you, so this is a heavier question for me, and I got asked this question this week.
Yeah.
Your age, doing student ministry, like, how do you feel about that? Is it a good thing? Is it like are there many guys our age doing student ministry? Like, is that weird, wild to you?
I was just actually talking to a guy about this yesterday, a guy who's been in the game for student ministry a long time, a mentor. And we were both talking about how there's a lot of guys in ministry that are like my age, student ministry, and then there's a lot of people who are really young, but there's not a lot of people in the middle.
Right.
And we believe there's kind of like a leadership fall off.
There is.
In just America, in that particular space. How I feel about it, I love it.
Yeah.
And I love being given the opportunity to invest in the next generation. I feel like lately more of what I do is raise up leaders in the next generation. Then I actually get to do what is traditionally considered a student pastor job. So much of what I do is vision, strategy, leadership development, discipleship, mentoring. Then I've got to be really intentional about being around teenagers and parents, because if not, my job could just be an administrator job. So I really like it. Now, teenagers, I always have this. It's so funny because like sometimes they call me Unc, or they call me the old student pastor. One teenager recently called me like the Yoda of the student ministry. I was okay with
That
this
works.
Yeah, I'm down with that.
I got called dad for a while. That was not cool.
The team calls me dad.
And for a different reason.
It feels very strange.
Yeah, but it also feels like, is it my Old Navy jeans? Is it my, is
I'm
it
like, I got Lulu joggers on. I'm doing okay.
is it well, you're not in your 40s yet.
Yeah,
Like
you
I've got the
would,
comb over. Like my hair used to go vertical, now it's horizontal. Like
Yeah.
it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not even pretending, like it is what it is.
Yeah, man. Trying to stay young.
I got asked on Sunday, how old are you? 41. How long are you going to be in, and sometimes it's, when are you going to get a real job? Sometimes it's, when
Never.
are you going to be a real pastor?
Never.
And I'm like, It's like, well, I'm actually a pastor now, but you know, I
Contrary
I
to
get
popular
I
belief,
get your
student
question.
pastors are also pastors.
Yeah, and I actually think, and I told someone this the other day. I was like, I don't think my job is more important. I just think it's as important. I think that, and especially in 2024, like what these kids are going through, and the phase of this post-COVID generation, and like guiding them through in this weird, wild society that we're in, like. Put some respect on my name a little bit. Like that's how I feel.
It is one of the most undervalued but most needed positions in churches.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is when it comes to being a student pastor, I consider it the highest calling.
Yeah.
And the little fear that's tucked away in my heart is, will I age out?
Yeah.
I hope to be doing student ministry in some form or fashion, or ministry to the next generation for the rest of my life. That's where I feel like my heart is.
Same. I keep pointing to Doug Fields, and I'm like, well, he's much older than me, and he's still killing it. So, as far as he's concerned, you know, as far as I'm concerned, he's doing it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna follow in his footsteps.
Mad respect for him and everything that he does, and all the things he's done. I've learned a lot from him and his books, and even have one of his books that I have our team read that are, especially when they're younger, like the first 2 years in student ministry, like great book for student pastors to read.
My team doesn't know this, but I bought them copies, and we're fixing to read it.
It's a great book.
Yeah, and it's like I need to read. I've been in student ministry for 2 decades. I need to read. I need to reread
When
it.
I was 19, the book that was put in my hands was the first book about student ministry was put in my hands was a book by Doug Fields, and it was Purpose Driven Student Ministry.
Yeah, and it's a good one.
It blew my mind as a 19-year-old. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
that's great. You
The
know?
book that was put in my hands as an intern was Next Generation Leader by Andy Stanley.
Incredible book.
And that blew my mind.
Yeah, I definitely have people read that on my team.
In fact, it turned me, Purpose Driven Life. That's so funny. So this was summer of 2003. Purpose Driven Life and Next Generation Leader were put in my hands. And that's when I turned into a reader, like for the first time, like, cause it was like the subject matter grabbed me.
Yeah.
And
That's
it was
so
right
good,
after
man.
my call. My call came to leadership or to ministry in summer of 2020, 2002. It wasn't the 20s yet. It was 2002. And then my internship was summer 2003. And that was, I mean, it's pivotal. Okay. You and I are both passionate about student leadership.
Done. Yes, absolutely. Agreed.
But you've been working on a project. We'll talk about that in a minute. Tell me a little bit about your heart for student leadership, like how you got there, and like what's the crux. Tell us about why it matters in student ministry.
So the way I got there was actually I was serving at a church part-time. It was the first church my wife and I were serving at, and I was trying to do everything in student ministry. And I had this one guy come to me, and he was like, hey, can you teach me how to play guitar? Because at the time I was leading worship, praying, and then preaching a message in student ministry.
That's tough.
You know, and if you've been there, you've been there. And so I was like, well, hey, man, the only way that's going to work is if you show up with me on Wednesday. Well, he got good, so good that I was like, well, you can play now. And then someone wanted to play keys, and then I didn't know much about keys, but someone else did, and that person learned. Before you know it, a student band kind of formed, and then I find myself in the back of the room, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And I'm on the computer, and then there's this other kid who's interested in the computer, and I'm like, well, yeah, man, this is how you make the slides work, which is PowerPoint at that point. He took over, and then I remember showing up on Wednesday night being like, yo, this thing's kind of running by teenagers. That's wild. And that's kind of how I did it for a while until I got to a bigger, larger scaled student ministry, and I started to think, how can I get more kids involved in this? And then that's kind of where, I reached out to other people, I read other books, and then I developed an internship program at a church in Louisiana, and then it just took off. And we would have 50, 60 interns working 20, 25 hours a week. They were all just students.
Pause. What? Say those numbers again.
So we had about 50, 60 students.
Yeah.
And they would work 20, 25 hours a week, and they were volunteered.
Oh my goodness. So are we talking? We're talking summer. Surely not school year.
No, it's throughout the year. You had 3 semesters. You had fall, spring, and summer.
So they're doing school.
Yes.
And then they're showing up to church.
Yes.
In mass.
After school, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are they doing? Tell me about the program.
So at the time, I didn't really have. We had a big student ministry, but I didn't have very much staff. It was me and another person. We had well over 300 students, and what ended up happening is I kind of operated under this belief that, and it's someone else's. I got to believe this is someone else's quote because it just sounds too good, which is give a student something meaningful and they'll be more engaged in their relationship with God.
Yeah.
So I was kind of operating under that kind of thinking, and I was like, okay, what can I give to them that's meaningful? And it turned into, well, if I'm going to God's word, well, that's spiritual gifting. How can I help them figure out their spiritual gifting? Well, by giving them experience. And if I give them experience, well, how can I do that in a way that makes sense to them? And it was like, well, I've got to just kind of create a system and a structure that kind of puts them through something like that. And so I read this book called The Leadership Pipeline, some industry book that was like, had nothing to do with student ministry.
Right.
And this book talked about how to build a pipeline of leaders in your company. And I thought, well, I could probably apply that to student ministry. I just have to tailor it in a way that is safe and all this kind of stuff. Well, at first it kind of got crazy and big, and I was like, okay, we need to scale this back because this is hard for me to manage all these people working all this time, and they were doing too much. But what they were doing was anything and everything that a church member would do on a Sunday. So preach, teach, lead worship, do the tech booth, greeting, games, set up chairs, stack chairs, you name it, anything that an adult could do, a teenager could do. And then what I kind of envisioned was, what would it look like if when a new kid showed up to our ministry and they saw people who looked like them and that was their age, but they were running the ministry? Well, what were the adults doing? Well, the adults were being student pastors. So all the small group leaders were just student pastors of their little small group. And that's how we looked at groups. And that worked really well. And I've kind of been doing it that way for about a decade.
So that has showed up. So you're now at Sugar Creek in Houston.
Yeah.
And you're also, okay, so we're both at multi-site churches.
Right.
And so kind of in the same neck of the woods. So is that implemented at all campuses?
Yes.
Man. So what are some of the main roles that you're giving a first-time student leader? Like, what are some of the things that they're doing? And I'm wondering if stair steps, if there's tiers to it.
Yeah, so there is different levels, and it kind of fleshes it out a little differently at every campus because every campus looks a little different. We're not cookie cutter at every campus because every campus is kind of like in a different journey of growth.
Right.
But we typically start out with hands-on things first. So, hey, you're setting up check-in. Hey, you're stacking chairs. Hey, you're making sure the building is clean and ready to go. People show faithful behavior and teachability there. Well, then we're going to talk about, okay, well, what do they do beyond that? And so, I mean, it is everything from like, man, they run the tech booth. They run the games on Sunday morning. They choose the games. They'll do social media. And then we have a teaching team. It's very hard to get onto the teaching team, in my opinion. We don't let anyone teach, and you have to actually exhibit the teaching spiritual gift.
Sure.
There are a lot of kids who want to teach, but not all of them do. But we don't let them teach on stage first. We have other opportunities we try to give them before that. So everything's kind of got like an on-ramp to it.
Yeah, that's good.
And that's just...
It's a true pipeline.
Yeah, that's how it works. There is every semester, kids have to apply. So fall, spring, summer, there's an application process that opens up. You have to go through the application process, whether you are first time or you're alumni, you have to go through it. And you go through the application process. We then, if you pass, you go through, and then we set up your lab teams, and your lab teams they look different at every campus. Yeah.
What's the youngest that you can be to show up in this pipeline?
So I mean, a new sixth grader can be, but we have to kind of know who they are and what they were like in elementary. But it's middle school and high school. I mean, you serve that way. So like at the Sugar Land campus, we have a middle school ministry, high school ministry, and we have a Spanish student ministry. So there's a student leadership team. We call it the Lab, which is based from the vision and mission of our church, which is lead all people, act it out, and be the culture, which is an embodiment of the mission, which is love and lead all people to life change in Christ. So in middle school, there's a way that they kind of run that play. In high school, there's a kind of a way they run that play in Spanish as well. At the other two campuses, they're all together right now. We haven't made the moves to middle school and high school environments yet. And they have a way that they run their teams as well.
Yeah. Wow. So let me ask you this. This is kind of a pivot, but our podcast is all about kind of addressing this, and I'm really trying to suss out exactly our student ministries, our youth pastors, seeing the deconstruction that we've been hearing about for the last few years, last several decades, when you really think about it. The stats have traditionally been that there's a drop off in high school, and then there's a significant drop off in college, and then the newer language around that is that they're deconstructing. They've lost some trust in and I believe that's real. One, are you seeing the deconstruction stuff happen in your church, and does the student leadership stuff kind of mitigate that a little bit?
I think the answer is giving students the opportunity to be the church when they're teenagers.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of ways you can structure that. Student leadership, I think, is the way to do it when you do it correctly and you're looking to scale it. Because just like you want adults to serve in your church, we need students serving in our church. At some point in time, I say this all the time in our student ministry, you can't just come to church and sit in a seat. You got to stand up and serve.
Yeah.
If you want to engage in your relationship with God and own your faith and make it your own and not just your parents, well, guess what? You've got to do something about it. And nothing will challenge your faith more than doing ministry the way God intended it. So if you're a high schooler and you go to a middle school camp and you're a co-leader with a 6th grade boys group, you're going to discover how much you actually know about God's word.
Yeah.
You may know a lot or you might not know much, but what most high schoolers discover is I've got some work to do.
Yeah.
And I think when you're engaging high schoolers in that, that's when it's really awesome. And it's not just in student ministry. You want them involved in your kids' ministry. You want them involved in the worship team. Anywhere their gifting can go, you want them involved.
Yeah.
I do think there is this current of thinking and philosophy that exists in churches where teenagers just need to be in a room and, hey, they'll be fine. And if they're fine, their parents are fine, which I think God has a bigger idea about the way teenagers should be handled in the church. I mean, if you would look at the disciples, man, most of the disciples were real young.
Yeah.
Like teens, 20s, maybe 30-somethings.
Yeah.
Most of them were pretty young. And we know that based upon how old was someone when they were assigned like a rabbi. Okay, obviously, it's my own paraphrasing. But they were in that age group. And so we believe most of the disciples, historically, were young. But often the church doesn't do that. What I love our church is our pastor gives us the freedom to flesh that out, and he loves seeing that. Not all churches are like that. It's a little bit of a change in thinking that has to happen. And some people just don't believe it until they see it. But I mean, we have well over 125 student leaders across campus.
Wow.
That's not a flex, it's just context.
Yeah.
So we have a ton that are serving.
Yeah. Is there, okay, so if we're listening, and quite frankly, I know that this is a missing element in our student ministry. We have started, I mean, they're serving, but it's not a robust system. And as we talk in our team, just in our context specifically, I have held I'm gatekeeping, I guess would be a funny way to say it, on like opening the floodgates on, all right, let's throw this, and it's the system. Can you talk to us a little bit about maybe if there's a youth pastor listening who's, man, we need to start this system. What would be a baseline way to start? And is there a wrong way to start this?
The best way to start is to start with the ones that you have. God gave you some people, start with those.
Yeah.
I think the only way to be wrong about it is when we start to be, how can I say, exclusive in terms of being a little cliquey. Not that I'm against cliques. I think there are two types of cliques, though, in the church. There are inclusive ones. Hey, we include everybody, and that's just a group of friends. There is exclusive, like, hey, you can't be in here because of such and such. And it's a tension to manage when you're raising leaders. So start with the ones you have. Think, who are the kids who are the most faithful? All right, ask them to come a little early to your Wednesday night or Sunday night or whenever you do your youth group, and just start a small Bible study with them, investing them as leaders, and then give them opportunities to lead. You don't really need to scale it unless you have a certain number of kids. That's when you need to get into scaling. So if you got a student ministry of like 30 to 40 kids, man, like 10 student leaders is epic. Like that is really good, If we're doing the math there, that means like 25% of your student ministry is serving, and that's better than most churches.
Yeah.
So that's a huge thing, There are no, again, this is someone else's thought. There is no small churches. There's just small thinking.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to young people, when you do big things to them, it feels big.
Yeah.
And when you do small things to them, it feels small. So when you involve them in the Great Commission, and involve them in what God's doing in their life, and you help them understand their identity in Christ, and you give them opportunities to flesh that out and to be the church and to serve and to do things outside the walls and inside the walls, well, what ends up happening? Well, you get to see them discover who they are in Christ. And so real tactically, though, I think you start with the ones you have. As far as the system is concerned, man, you could totally reach out to me about that. I'd love to help you develop one. That's pretty simple. And then I think the key thing is, and this one's kind of a little tricky, is you do have to make it your own in that every context is different. Every church is different. And when you're going to want to give up, it feels like it's not working. It's probably close to working. So consistency is key with something like this. You got to keep showing up even when those kids don't want to show up, and you got to be consistent in their life because you're teaching them habits they don't know yet.
Yeah.
And so, man, there's all kinds of ways you can do it. You can do it on a small scale. You can do it on a large scale. Either way.
Okay, that's awesome. Is there a sense of I think all of this sounds great, and then you let students run stuff, and then it gets real messy, and maybe not as excellent. Where do you find the intersection of like maybe we want to teach and we want to grow them, but we also want it to hit this level of excellence?
Yeah, so that it really comes down to a leader's level of excellence. If you don't have a level of excellence as a leader, your kids aren't going to have one. So, for example, like here's some just simple things in terms of maybe production of a service, okay? Because that's sometimes where student pastors feel a lot of tension. Is like, hey, do you do a rehearsal for your game for the service? Do you do a rehearsal for your message yourself in your office before Sunday, or are you slapping together at the last minute? If you do rehearsals, involve people in your rehearsals. And then, yeah, it is definitely messy. Yes, kids mess up, say things from stage they shouldn't, or whatever. But those are coaching moments where you get to disciple them and orient them towards what you should do. And if they have to apologize in front of someone for saying something, again, that's a discipleship moment. And if you wouldn't give them the opportunity, guess what? They'd never learn that stuff in your space. So you have to be able to give them those opportunities. Now, in our ministry, this is just how it works. We have Sunday morning, we have Sunday night. And then we have camps. Like those are the levels of probably serving. So, you start serving on Sunday mornings, that's kind of like low level. On Sunday nights, that's another level of serving. Then we invite you to come to camp and help us do camp in some form or fashion. You come up early and help us set up high school camp. You come early and help us run middle school camp. Well, there are certain things that are awarded to you in terms of opportunity because you've been so faithful in the other things. And that's just how we kind of do it. And so on a real small scale, don't let a kid lead a game without you first seeing what the game is and rehearsing it with them. So maybe do a game with them on stage for a little bit. It's kind of that old adage of volunteering. It's like, hey, let me show you, then I'm going to watch you, then I'm going to step back and I'm going to let you do it. And then your goal is to teach someone else.
That's good. That's good. I think that when I've run student leadership systems in the past, one of the things that is sneaky beautiful about the system is that, and this is why I think it actually wars against this deconstruction thing, is that you give them, it's essentially a padded room to experience what it's like to be a Christian as an adult and do church as an adult, which is sometimes messy and sometimes difficult, and sometimes you got to step into difficult things. But if all we do is like, here's pizza and video games, just consume for 7 years, and then go off to college and don't know how to do anything on your own. The student leadership, I think, is the sneaky little way to Trojan horse in. This is what it's like to be a Christian as an adult, and you're no different than, you're just younger than me, and I'm going to teach you and train you in the way. Obviously, there's a huge discipleship component to this. There's a mentoring component to this that is found in the New Testament, like all over the place. So, thank you so much for taking some time to share this with us. You have been working on a book project about student leadership. Right. Tell us a little bit about that, and can we expect when is this available for purchase, or because everyone is going to want this.
Well, so I've been working on a book for some time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's
and it takes it's a first book.
This would be my first book.
Yeah,
yes.
and that obviously yeah, you and me
I'm
both.
out here, I think
you
I
and
know
me
it
both.
Yeah, it's like I've written papers, but this is a bigger paper. So we're going to a book right now. It's basically about the art of developing student leaders, and this kind of talks about the philosophy behind what I've done over the years, and then how can you implement something like this in your space. And I'm writing it in such a way that it could be done in a student ministry, but it also could be done somewhere else, And so I want it to kind of be a resource to both places. The goal is for it not to be a big book, but to kind of almost be like a handbook of how to do it.
Okay.
And so as far as that, I'm actually in the space of trying to figure out publishers right now and kind of tailoring that stuff, which is like a whole new space to me. So I'm excited about that.
Well, can you hurry up because we're ready to read it?
Well, here's the thing. I'd be happy to help someone as much as I could. Yeah, look, you're right. I mean, this is where I really appreciate your friendship is you're definitely keeping me accountable there because I will find a ton of reasons to not publish, not because I don't want to, but because it's like a little bit of a scary space. I mean, like I've never been in there and I don't want to do it wrong.
Yeah.
And I definitely don't want to look like an idiot, but I also don't want to like chat GPT my book either. So, someone out there listening like, oh, I'm doing that right now.
Yeah.
That's cool, man, if it's working for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a book I'm working on right now.
So I guess the best way, if someone is listening to this in the future and they don't know if it's published, the best way would be to go to maybe your website.
Yeah, just go to my website. It's a really simple website, abramhaley.com.
abramhaley.com.
Or you can find me on Instagram, which is pastor_Abram. And you can either just DM me there or you can fill out the form that's on my website, and I'd love to connect with people.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then you told me right before we hit record that you guys have started a podcast in your student ministry.
Yeah, we did. Shout out to actually the person on my team who made it happen, which is Kylie Smith. She's an incredible hard worker. We started a podcast called The Studio. First season was this summer. Our newest season just is releasing this coming month, and we got some really cool communicators on there as well that were like some guest communicators. But man, definitely go out there, give it a follow. It's called The Studio, and we're Sugar Creek students.
There it is. It was I will tell you, sometimes these things are hard to find. It is the first thing that came up as soon as
That's good.
That's awesome.
Again, way to go, Kylie.
Way to go, Kylie. Okay, we're going to, and the first one is leading the way. So
yeah. The other thing you can do is follow us on our Instagram and student ministry, which is Sugar Creek_students. Man, you can just engage with us there and see the stuff we're doing.
Awesome. Very cool. Dude, thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me. And I would end with a joke, but my comedy is not great.
That's good. Appreciate it.
Yeah.